Fire up the DeLorean and let's journey back to the cozy year of 1878. We're heading into a Canadian winter that locals fondly remembered as the reason vacations were invented. It was bad, lots of snow and ice, and not a single Instacart driver in sight. It was the kind of winter that made you seriously question your ancestors' decision to settle in Canada in the first place, rather than, say, anywhere warmer, like maybe Antarctica. It's in this winter wonderland that we meet Swift Runner, a Cree trapper well known and respected throughout his community. Swift Runner wasn't just an ordinary outdoorsman. He was the kind of skilled survivalist who could probably light a campfire underwater, or catch a moose barehanded. When other trappers got lost in blizzards, they'd sigh wistfully, wishing Swift Runner was there to magically navigate them home. Even his name sounds like some kind of a survivalist hero, who also happens to enjoy contemporary pop artists that won't be born for over a century. But as fate would have it, even Swift Runner had his limits. During this particular winter, Swift Runner and his family were living miles from the nearest city. Food was running low and supplies dwindled, and the trappings that winter were worse than usual, mostly because even the animals were on vacation in California. Soon enough, Swift Runner and his family found themselves trapped in an endless storm, isolated in a landscape that could only be navigated if you happen to have a glowing red-nosed reindeer. Spring eventually arrived, thankfully, as it tends to do, and Swift Runner wandered into a Catholic mission, miles from his isolated cabin. He was clearly shaken, but seemed to have endured the brutal winter quite well. In fact, maybe a little too well. The priest helped Swift and took him in, asking how Swift's family is. When Swift answered, "My family? They're delicious." The priest got a little suspicious. Suspicion intensified as the priest noticed that after the brutal winter, Swift seemed to have put on a little bit of weight. Swift Runner, who hadn't exactly started the winter season as slim and athletic, was somehow now looking positively healthy after months of supposed starvation. While the missionaries were no experts on dietary miracles, they were pretty sure that starvation generally doesn't leave one looking like they've been sneaking midnight snacks. Things got even stranger when Swift Runner began waking the entire mission each night by screaming about being possessed by something called the Wendigo. The priest knew very little about Algonquin folklore, but waking up every night to the screams of someone claiming to be possessed by an ancient spirit of eternal hunger isn't exactly comforting. So, with curiosity and the kind of nervous judgment reserved for Catholic priests, they decided to investigate. The priest gathered a group and traveled to Swift Runner's isolated cabin. What they found was, to put it gently, something that inspired immediate regret about the trip. The cabin was indeed devoid of life, and it was very clear that Swift Runner's diet during the winter had been unconventional in ways the priest would have preferred never knowing about. The priest quickly returned to the mission and told Swift that he would no longer be allowed to participate in the church's Chili Con Carnival next week, and then they sent for the authorities. Swift Runner was promptly arrested, which surprised absolutely no one, including Swift Runner. When asked by investigators how this had happened, he gave a very simple and chilling explanation. It was the Wendigo. He claimed this ancient Algonquin spirit had crept into his soul, whispered to him during those cold winter nights, and made him crave an extremely unethical food source. When he had his wife and kids for dinner, he really had his wife and kids for dinner. To the Cree, another Algonquin-speaking tribes, the Wendigo was no joke. It was their embodiment of hunger, starvation, winter despair, and oddly enough, greed. The Wendigo was to hunger what the Incredible Hulk is to anger and rage and Marvel cameos. Their legend stated that the Wendigo possessed those who broke the ultimate taboo of their culture, resorting to, let's say, alternative meat sources. A Wendigo wasn't some cartoonish monster. It was a creature that was disturbingly human yet terribly wrong. Its appearance was skeletal, gaunt, icy, a figure so hungry that no meal could ever satisfy it. In short, it was a creature that never, ever, ever got invited to a family reunion twice. Swift Runner's story is shocking, but not unique. There are many accounts of people claiming to be possessed by the Wendigo. Swift Runner does, however, hold the distinction of being the only person to be executed for acting out the cravings that the Wendigo would fill him with. There are many other casualties of the Wendigo in Canadian history, but in most records, they are all people who were being possessed by the Wendigo being stopped by friends and family before they could act out their impulses. And usually they were stopped in a very final way. Some communities even began employing specialists to deal with the Wendigo problem. This brings us to the illustrious Jack Fiddler, an OG Cree medicine man in chief who built quite a reputation dealing with Wendigos in northwestern Ontario. Jack Fiddler's job description was unusual, even by Canadian wilderness standards. Fiddler was a shaman of the Sucker Dudum clan, and yes, it was actually called the Sucker Dudum clan. I didn't believe it either, but will Wikipedia lie? Jack regularly claimed to battle the forces of evil. Throughout his career, Fiddler's clients weren't horned beasts or ghostly shadows. They were regular people who feared they were losing their humanity, people whose families begged Jack for help, and Jack, ever the dedicated professional, obliged. When someone in his village began muttering about odd cravings or showing signs of behavior that could indicate Wendigo transformation, Jack intervened swiftly. He claimed to have defeated 14 Wendigo, but the method of beating these monsters was a little bit iffy. From Jack's viewpoint, he was a healer, performing a sacred duty. His community fully supported him, believing his actions protected them all, or at least it protected anyone he didn't think was possessed by a Wendigo. However, not everyone viewed Jack's work with enthusiasm. In 1907, word of his practices reached the ears of Canadian authorities. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who generally discouraged this kind of vigilantism, quickly arrested Jack for crimes they categorized less as healing and more as illegal homicide. The arrest caused confusion amongst Jack's followers, who couldn't grasp why protecting their village was suddenly considered criminal. Jack tried his best to explain to the authorities what the Wendigo was and why his actions were necessary. But let's face it, "It wasn't my fault, I was fighting an evil spirit" is rarely an effective legal defense. Jack's explanations fell on deaf ears, and tragically, he never got to fully explain his case. Before trial, Jack left this world abruptly by his own hand. His career as a Wendigo hunter definitively over. Jack's career in the Swift Runner incident captured the interest of psychologists in the early 20th century, who dubbed this phenomenon the Wendigo psychosis. They described it as a mental condition triggered by extreme hunger and isolation, leading sufferers to crave human companionship in the most digestive sense imaginable. Soon enough, the Wendigo moved beyond psychology books and history lessons, entering popular culture. Hollywood discovered the Wendigo and naturally twisted it into something far less nuanced. Gone was the unsettlingly human spirit. Instead, films and TV depicted it as a hairy, horned, clawed monstrosity that chased unfortunate campers through the woods. Despite these exaggerated portrayals, traditional stories still surface. Campers and hunters across North America report hearing strange whispers calling their name in the dark forest at night. Of course, hearing your name whispered in the dark forest isn't exactly calming no matter what the source is. Whether it's supernatural or just someone messing with you, most folks tend to quickly pack their tents and head home, often swearing they'll never camp again before getting to the point of trying the Wendigo diet plan. Nowadays, Indigenous elders share Wendigo stories with younger generations, not as scary stories, but as important cultural reminders. The Wendigo, they explain, isn't just about strange hunger or mythical creatures. It's a metaphor for what happens when people lose sight of compassion and community. It symbolizes the destruction nature of greed and isolation, both in personal relationships and on a global scale. Some modern interpretations liken unchecked environmental exploitation or corporate greed to a type of Wendigo spirit, endlessly consuming without ever feeling satisfied. Whether through actual eating or metaphor, the Wendigo is a cryptid version of Pringles. Once you pop, you can't stop. So, what should you do if you encounter a Wendigo, or at least someone acting suspiciously Wendigo-like? Well, an Algonquin legend actually does suggest a remedy: warmth, community, and kindness. Basically, the Wendigo is the ultimate introvert. It flees genuine human connection. You might also recommend a good therapist or nutritionist, just in case the issue is more practical than spiritual. If you ever feel strange cravings in an endless winter, remember Swift Runner, Jack Fiddler, and the Wendigo legend. Maybe invite a friend over for a nice normal dinner. Emphasis on normal. Or just take that 25-mile walk to the trading post before you get too hungry. In the end, maybe the Wendigo is simply there to remind us of something fundamental. We're all a little closer to becoming monsters than we like to think. But we're also just a warm conversation, a helping hand, or a good home-cooked meal away from staying human. And if the Wendigo ever does invite you over for dinner, just make sure to be somewhere else. I hope you've enjoyed this quick glimpse into the Wendigo myth. If you'd like to hear more about weird monsters that shape our shadows, hit that subscribe button. And remember, friends don't eat friends. See ya.